We have a big speakers race going on, a lot of horse trading apparently behind the scenes for Jim Jordan as he accrues more and more support. Here is the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy, this morning on Fox.
My focus is to get Jim Jordan elected speaker, get this Congress back moving again. Right. It's one thing to get elected. It's another thing to govern.
Well, is Kevin McCarthy's endorsement enough to get him over the finish line? David Drucker joins us now. He's a senior writer for The Dispatch and the author of the book In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. David, great to have you back with us, sir.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
This speaker race has been interesting. There were a bunch of holdouts going into the weekend, but it seems one by one they're starting to fall in Jim Jordan's direction. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, look, I think if we look at who's been endorsing him or saying they will vote for him on the floor tomorrow, when the vote is scheduled for tomorrow at noon is when they're supposed to come in and begin proceedings. These were not just holdouts, but prominent members of the conference who, one, had supported Kevin McCarthy and then Steve Scalise, and two, were not happy with how Jordan and his supporters handled the initial election that elevated Scalise. And so getting their support, I think, is crucial, because when other members that are also holdouts start to look at prominent members of major committees in the conference begin to move, they start to feel like they're out there a little bit on an island, and it's not where the House Republicans like to be, not the kind of House Republicans that are interested in governing and care about the institution. And so I'd say right now that Jordan is the favorite to win a floor vote, even if it takes a couple rounds. But he's a favorite.
Sure. What I'm wondering, though, is what cause any of these Republicans might have to be grumpy with him. You mentioned the vote for Scalise in the first place, but, as I've seen it throughout, Jim Jordan has kind of been rather gracious towards all of these guys, to include when he supported McCarthy to become speaker in the first place. He supported McCarthy during the ouster vote. He then put his name in the hat after McCarthy said, I'm not going to be a part of this race anymore. When he lost to Scalise, he said, okay, I'm going to back Scalise. In fact, I'm going to give a speech nominating him for the role. Scalise couldn't accrue enough support. He jumped out of the race. Now Jordan's back in it. It's hard to see how Jordan could be more gracious than he's been to these guys.
Well, look, if you talk to Republicans who supported Scalise, they don't believe that Jordan was as gracious as it appears. What they believe happened was that Jordan said he would support Scalise on the first ballot, and then all bets were off. I think number two, there's a lot of frustration because Kevin McCarthy won a conference vote to nominate him to become Speaker of the House last fall with 188 votes, I believe. The conference then proceeded to disregard that on the House floor. The conference then votes to elevate Scalise, and according to the rules, the winner of the vote is supposed to be the nominee who gets the votes on the floor. People who didn't like the way the vote went then proceeded to ignore the results of the vote and said that they would not honor it on the House floor. And so I think for members that have been honoring the outcome of these votes, there is a lot of frustration that they're put in a position where they have to do what many other members refused to do. And because it's these many other members that have refused to do it, at least recently, because they prefer Jordan, I think that's where the frustration comes from.
Got it. But now that Jordan has won the nominating vote behind closed doors, one would assume that if the rule is you're supposed to vote for the guy, those very same people who made that argument would do that.
Yeah, that's why I think you've seen them begin to fall in line today. But I think that when one group of people do not – look, we talked about this. Think about this in terms of illegal immigration.
Right.
What frustrates so many Americans about illegal immigration is that they're paying their taxes and following the rules, and you have a group of people that are breaking the law and are not punished for breaking the rules. And so beyond all the national security implications and budgetary implications of illegal immigration, there's this broad frustration in America among many people that why do I have to follow the rules and they don't?
Right.
And I think you can use that example and then it's like, why do we have to follow the rules? Well, because you say the rules matter, but it's not fair. And so you use that analogy, I think, to understand the frustration in the conference.
So what's interesting, though, is, when McCarthy was elected in the first place, the the demands that were put on him in order to get him elected were pretty public, I thought. I mean, the people who were holdouts had a specific list of things they wanted. They were very public about what they wanted. I feel like with this process, I'm just suspicious of it, David Drucker, that there may be some horse trading going on out of public sight in order to bring over people like Mike Rogers and in the last few hours here, Vernon Buchanan. They're now signaling their support for Jim Jordan. They're claiming, well, look, we talked to him and we're ready to be good team players and to support him. But I kind of suspect there's got to be a little bit more to it than that they got some sort of key concession out of him in order to get to yes.
Well, that could be the case, and I think, we're going to have to see how this unfolds. I think one of the, and this gets back to, I think there's been this problem in the conference where there are many members, and I'm not casting aspersions or meaning this in a pejorative way among any faction of the conference, where people, in order to get your vote, want very specific asks satisfied. But a lot of times one faction's ask goes against the principles of another faction's ask.
Sure.
And it's very hard to lead. And it's, by the way, very hard to negotiate and win concessions and leverage your majority in divided government when the Senate's controlled by the Democrats and the White House is controlled by Democrats, when your conference doesn't give your leader, the flexibility and the latitude to lead and then come back and say, obviously, I need your approval in all of this, but here's the best way we can get something conservative out of a government in which we are outnumbered.
Right.
And so I think this is part of the issue that is going to plague Jordan if he wins the gavel.
Yep.
How does he negotiate a deal that by its very nature, President Biden and Chuck Schumer are going to have to be able to declare some sort of victory?
Sure.
Well, he's only going to be able to do it if they give him more latitude than they would give Kevin McCarthy.
Right, and the reason that it's like this is because of the narrow margin on power that they have in the House. The same is true in the Senate for the Democrats. They have to work to satisfy people like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to get their legislative agenda advanced. Having such small margins mean fewer members can control so much of the activities there. And so if I could use that, I want to jump into kind of the future of electoral politics here for a moment, because there may be an opportunity for Republicans to gain more seats in the House if yesterday's election in Louisiana is any indication. Jeff Landry just won a massive victory this week. He won't even have to compete in the general election to become the next governor now of Louisiana. Tell us about this, and what do you think this means?
I think it's too early to know what it means. I think when you look at the breadth of elections occurring this year, Democrats have won most of them, and I don't think that tells us enough about anything about next year. Next year is going to be largely about the presidential race, presumably between Biden and Trump, but not necessarily. And usually that overshadows and carries along or depresses, depending on how it works, everything else. That's why I think a lot of the discussions about, the chaos in the House over the past 2 weeks, what does that mean for 2024? Way too premature, may not even matter at the end of the day.
Sure.
I mean, look, for Republicans to do this well in an overwhelmingly red state, they should feel good that they did their job. And I think it shows that the party at least doesn't have some of the issues that it might have appeared it had. If you look at the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin and some of these other specials, and of course this is a normal off-year election in Louisiana, but it shows that Republicans are energized and that they're going to turn out, and that's important.
Yeah, for sure. And to go back to the point I was just making about how he's not even going to have to compete in the general, it's because Louisiana has this jungle primary. If you get over 50% support, you're good to go. And he did. He got 52% of the state. But meanwhile, another indicator I'm looking at, David Drucker, of optimism for Republicans is in Pennsylvania. They've got all this new voter registration going on, and Republicans are outpacing Democrats in registering new voters 2-1. So there's clearly some energy here to, I think, anti-Biden energy fundamentally around the country, and Republicans may have a tailwind from that.
They may. I mean, look, I think this is why, we make all of these assumptions about what's going to hurt Democrats or help Republicans and vice versa. But you don't really know until you do the work, right? So Republicans were, at least broadly speaking, very suspicious of and generally opposed to this new law pushed by the Democratic governor in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Turns out it's been very good for Republicans.
Right.
And in Republicans in recent years The old adage when we were kids is that high turnout was good for Democrats and low turnout was better for Republicans, just as a general rule. And that hasn't necessarily been the case over the past decade or so. And so it's a matter of, where voters are, how they feel about the candidates next year, and what the issue set is.
You mentioned in the presidential, we're not confident that the two nominees at the moment, or the two frontrunners at the moment, will end up being the nominees on Election Day. But let's say they were for a moment, that we do have Joe Biden and Donald Trump as the front of their respective parties. What role do the independent candidates play in this race, in particular RFK Jr. and Cornel West, the socialist? Could they, play a spoiler in this race?
Well, they could, and we've seen it in the past. The RFK Jr. candidacy is interesting because initial polling has shown that he could hurt Biden more than Trump, but there's also data to suggest he could hurt Trump more than Biden. It could totally be a wash. Cornel West could end up being a candidate that might remind us of Ralph Nader from 2000. Gets very little, but just enough in the right places to swing an election. And then again, we make a lot of presuppositions about how these third-party candidates are going to impact an election. And sometimes all they end up doing is getting votes from people that were never going to vote in the first place or never going to vote for the two major party candidates. And so we're going to have to explore the data as it continues to come out in the coming months to kind of see what the dynamic is.
Yeah, and these early polls, these very early polls on things like, RFK taking votes from Biden, it strikes me, David, that a lot of that is just people signaling their discontent with Biden, but many of those people will come home when it comes time to vote.
They will, and if Trump is the nominee, he's the one big unifying factor that Biden gets. Now, by the way, Biden can absolutely lose to Trump. We've seen the polling on that, but I would have told you that a year ago. He absolutely can. But one thing Trump does for Biden is give people a reason to crawl over Democrats a reason to crawl over broken glass to vote for him when they otherwise might not. And so, again, a lot of different factors to watch here in the year ahead.
All right. David Drucker over at The Dispatch and the author of the book In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. David, thanks so much for your time today, as always, sir.